Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our stakeholder call for minimum stated charge extension for the straw proposal. Today, I will be joined by Gabe Murtaugh and Bill Weaver, who will be helping us with this call today. And I wanted to go over some quick housekeeping rules. And for today's housekeeping rules, this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As well, this meeting is structured to stimulate any dialogue and engage different perspectives, so feel free to keep your comments short and brief so that way we can manage our time during the next 3 hours. And the instructions to raising your hand is that if you are dialed in on WebEx, feel free to use the raise hand icon above your chat window. This will allow us to call on you and unmute you. Before stating a question, make sure to state your name and your affiliation so we can know who's speaking. And for those who are wishing to participate in the chat, feel free to provide your affiliation as well and those questions to all panelists. But other than that, we appreciate any verbal comments and utilizing the raise hand icon as well. For today's agenda, we will be going over a little bit on the stakeholder process for one slide, and then Gabe Murtaugh will go over the background and policy and take time to take questions at the end. And lastly, we will wrap things up with the next steps for this initiative. For this timeline here that we're showing, shows that we posted a straw proposal last week on Thursday, and we are having the call. We are taking comments now till the 23rd of February for the straw proposal, and our plan is to post the final proposal on the 6th, following the March Board of Governors on the 21st and the 23rd. And then here we show the stakeholder process timeline. As you can see, there is a little difference from other timelines. The only difference is that we're going from straw proposal to final proposal. So we are gonna skip over that middle chunk where it describes the draft final proposal and the other items that are optional per initiative. But at this time, we are currently a straw proposal, and our next step is to post the final proposal on the 6th. And now I'll go ahead and introduce Gabe Murtaugh to test his audio and video before we kick things off.
All right. Can you hear me, Brenda?
Yes.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I am Gabe Murtaugh, the Storage Sector Manager here at California ISO. We are talking today about the minimum state of charge and the extension policy. So this is kind of a, we just published this last week, and it's kind of a combination issue paper straw proposal all in one. But for those of you who recall, when we were previously talking about the minimum stated charge, when we were discussing it as a 2-year tool, and that 2-year window has elapsed, and we're now at a point where we need to think about whether or not we may need to retain the tool. And if we are indeed going to retain the tool, we have to, get policy in place by this summer, and that's why we're trying to expedite this particular process, as Brenda has already noted. So let's go ahead, and my other hope today is that, even though, the paper's not terribly long, the policy is not very complicated. All we're saying is that we're extending the use of the minimum stated charge tool. We're not doing anything else. We're not augmenting the tool. The scope is very narrow here. So hopefully this call will not, in fact, take all 3 hours. Hopefully we'll be much shorter than that. Okay, anyway, let's go ahead on to, the material. Thank you very much. So when we were discussing storage resources and storage capacity and how that storage capacity could potentially help our markets meet needs across an entire 24-hour profile on a very stressful day. We had some discussions about how storage resources would actually work in our market. And this was, a few years ago before we had very much storage capacity installed. Obviously today we have several thousand megawatts on our system. and these resources really are critical on some of the peak days. But back when we first started discussing this, we didn't actually know a whole lot about how storage resources were actually going to perform in the market, and kind of how much or how little we may actually be relying on them, and how much state of charge could be a concern. But one of the things that we brought up was that we have this great day-ahead market process. And the day-ahead market process looks at a profile of loads over the course of a full 24-hour period. It also looks at all the generation that's available for each hour during that 24-hour period. And for storage resources, it can sort of pair the storage resources so that it is charging, the whole fleet of storage resources are charging at the lowest priced hours of the day, and they're discharging during the highest priced hours of the day. The low priced hours of the day also correspond to the lowest net load period, so the lowest load, less renewable generation for the California market, all 12 months of the year. Those tend to be the middle hours of the day, hour ending 10, 11, 12, 13. That's when we have a whole lot of solar generation on our system, and the solar generation really pushes down that net load curve. It also corresponds to the periods of the day when we have the lowest prices on the system. So the storage resources are aligned with the incentives of the ISO because they also want to charge during these intervals. The storage resources are scheduled through our day-ahead market to charge during the highest priced intervals. That those also happen to be the highest net load hours of the day, and those high net load hours also correspond to the highest prices of the day. So the incentives are aligned for the storage resources to do that as well. They're getting paid the maximum price, and they're getting charged the minimum price when they're actually charging. So things work out very well in our day-ahead market. Particularly for 4-hour duration storage resources, you could think about them charging for 4, maybe 5 hours because of round-trip efficiencies during those low-priced hours, and then they're discharging later in the day. Now, obviously, our day-ahead market is also going to include things like, what we call and what we've referred to as bid spreads. So if I charge, if I bid to charge at, say, any price lower than $20 and bid to discharge at any price higher than $50, if the actual spread doesn't exceed $30, taking into consideration round-trip efficiencies and things like that, the day-ahead market will also not schedule the storage resources to charge. As long as those hurdle rates are met, you'll schedule the resource to charge and discharge. So once you are thinking about the system on really critical days, a day when you're thinking about needing every single megawatt of capacity during the peak hour, you really want to make sure that your resources are scheduled to be discharging during that period. And obviously, our market is taking into consideration that those resources have state of charge in order to actually provide that discharge by virtue of how the state of charge formula works in our markets. So again, the day-ahead market does a really good job of that. It also knows that even though the hour immediately preceding the peak hour and the hour immediately following the peak hour may not need every single megawatt of capacity in the system, they still need a lot of megawatts of capacity, and they're likely going to need a large portion of that storage fleet. So for those hours, the day-ahead market is doing the same thing. It's saying, yes, make sure you've got enough storage resource capacity that's there, that's charged and available, and again, doing a very nice job making sure that those schedules are efficient and those resources are there and available. Things get a little bit more challenging when you start talking about the real-time market. So there really isn't a connection between what the results of the day-ahead market are, the schedules that storage resources actually see, and I apologize, there's a fire engine or something going by the house, so apologize for the background noise. But there are no connections between the schedules that you see in the day-ahead market and those optimal, charging and discharging patterns and the results that are coming out of the real-time market. So what is our real-time market doing? Our real-time market is the same basic engine that we use for the day-ahead market, but instead of looking across 24 hours, we're looking out about an hour. So we're thinking, at 11 a.m., we're thinking about gee, what do I want my resources to do, all the resources across the system in an optimal setting in between, 11 a.m. and noon, and we're not really concerned about anything beyond that. And typically, what the real-time market is doing most often is saying, gee, our prices below your bids, if they're below the bids, I'm going to charge the resource. Our prices above the bids, if they're above the bids, I'm going to discharge the resource. And if they're kind of in the middle of your charge and discharge bid, I'm going to just tell you to set it zero. So for storage resources, this can be a little bit concerning because obviously if at 11 o'clock we know that at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., we're going to be effectively in a system emergency and prices just happen to be too high at 11 that they don't clear the bids that have been inserted into the market by the scheduling coordinator for that storage resource, you could easily get yourself into a situation where the storage resource doesn't actually charge and you don't have stated charge for later in the day. Or, and this is what we actually saw in September, you could be at 2 p.m. and again, you critically need every single storage resource you possibly can get at 6 p.m., but prices are really high at 2 p.m. So because of those very high prices, they incentivize all resources, not just storage resources, to provide energy to the grid, and that those signals, those market signals, could effectively deplete your stated charge from storage resources and effectively make them unavailable for when you critically need them later in the day. So it's kind of a conversation around what the problem was that we were thinking about a few years ago. And of course, this could, I think there's really two potential issues here. I think the first potential issue is from a storage operator perspective or a scheduling coordinator perspective. You've got this issue of, gee, I've made this day-ahead schedule, potentially in real time things may change, and the changes between the day-ahead market and the real-time market could cause me to have to buy back my day-ahead schedule. It could potentially be at high prices. I don't want to do that. So, maybe we need some additional tools in the market to kind of guard against this. And then the second problem, and this is an ISO problem, is, you can have a reliability issue because if these resources really aren't charged on those critical days during the critical hours, you could drop load, and you're just dropping load because you didn't do the best job planning. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, please. I'm sorry for all the text on these ones. There's just a lot to kind of get out there. So we talked about the two problems that were initially discussed by the ISO and some of the early policy. We were initially thinking about the minimum stated charge requirement, which is what we're talking about today, in a policy that had a long name called the Market Enhancements for Summer 2021 Readiness. And basically what this policy did is it took concepts that were initially talked about in the ESDR 4 policy and the Resource Adequacy Enhancements policies, where we had kind of, in both cases, and I think ESDR was a little bit more focused on kind of some of those scheduling coordinator issues, and the Resource Adequacy Initiative was a little bit more focused on reliability issues. And we kind of said, hey, look, we know we can have some, first of all, we're going to get large amounts of new storage resources on our system over the next few years. We could potentially have reliability issues because those new resources are coming onto our system. We want to ensure that they're there on the very tightest days. And in order to do that, and so we're not really addressing the scheduling coordinator issue, but we are going to address this reliability issue. And in order to do that, we're going to develop a tool that's going to have very targeted use cases. And what we came up with was a new tool called the Minimum Stated Charge Requirement. And what we did is we specified that we're only going to use it under very certain circumstances. First of all, this tool would only apply to resource adequacy resources, so it's not something that applies, generally to all storage resources. It's just the RA, California RA resources. The tool is only going to be triggered on days when we have RUC and feasibilities. So these are days when our day-ahead market thinks that we're going to have insufficient supply to meet our expected demand. And those days don't happen a whole lot. I think typically, over the last 3 years, we've had, 5 to 15 days over the summer where, rush has been infeasible, and we've really thought that reliability was threatened, and those are roughly the days when we've triggered this particular tool. These are only going to apply to day-ahead discharge awards during a certain set of critical hours. So it's not going to be that a storage resource has a discharge award at 9 a.m. to help with the morning ramp, and that we're going to be procuring and ensuring that that resource has sufficient state of charge at 8 a.m. or leading up to 9 a.m. We're really only going to be applying this on the tightest hours of the day. Typically, these are the evening hours, so hour ending, again, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, something like that. A narrow subset of hours, and they're only applied to discharge awards. So ensuring you have enough state of charge to meet those discharge awards during those critical hours. And then we also, again, this was in the ESRA 4 and the Resource Adequacy Enhancements Policy. We talked a lot about, when we were actually going to start enforcing the constraints. So you need to have a certain amount of state of charge. Do you need to have that state of charge at 11 o'clock? Do you need to have it at 3 p.m.? Do you need to have it at 5 p.m. for a 6 p.m. discharge award? Well, what we said in this policy is we basically want it to be as being as little invasive as possible, so the least amount invasive as possible. So what we did is to say that the requirement to hold state of charge is only going to be applied in the hours immediately preceding the critical hours. So if you need 100 megawatt hours for a discharge award at hour ending 1800, you would only be required to have that 100 megawatt hours just going up into that, leading up into that hour ending 1800. And then finally, and this is kind of the point where we're getting to today, the minimum state of charge requirement was only in place for a limited period of time. This wasn't going to be a tool that the ISO used indefinitely. We still think that this is true. We're not going to use this indefinitely, but we said we want to basically retire the minimum state of charge requirement after summer of 2022. So that was kind of our initial position there. So let's go on to the next slide, please. And I apologize. I know there's a lot of talking. I will get to questions here in a minute, but I'm just kind of setting up the background here for what we want to talk about. So the ISO did use the minimum state of charge requirement, did use the minimum state of charge requirement during the heat wave in summer 2022. I think our operators have given us feedback, and they said, yeah, look, if we didn't have this tool, it would have been a lot more difficult to manage the system. The minimum state of charge requirement was not the only tool that the operators used. They also used sort of traditional exceptional dispatch tools as well to help manage the storage fleet. And frankly, they were using traditional exceptional dispatch for other resources across the fleet as well. So I would say in September, when we had our all-time record load, we were definitely using every tool that we had at our disposal. And the operators have said that unequivocally the minimum state of charge tool helped them do their job. As we've said, and we don't want to belabor this here, but conditions were very tight in that first week and a half of September. September 6th, obviously, was the day that we set our record load. We really did have situations come up where there were economic signals, so very high prices in the hours preceding the evening peak. So I think this is hour ending 14, 15, 16. In that time frame, prices were above $1,000 in the RTD market for almost every single interval. So really, really high prices, certainly higher than typical prices we would expect in the real-time market, even under very tight conditions. Things were particularly tight for a long time on September 6th. And I think we'd also note that just in general, and I think this is the data that I was kind of summarizing on the previous page, but we did have RUC and feasibilities between 6 and 14 days during the summers of 2020, 2021, and 2022. So we're not talking about using this tool, you know, 100 days during the summer. It doesn't apply every single day, anything like that. It really is on those very tight, very, very critical days that the ISO is kind of flagging these situations where we need to use this tool. So in the next slide, we're showing a panel, a series of graphics, and this is our actual, oh, if we can advance the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is showing a series of days in September, so the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. These were all days that we had RUC and feasibilities. The minimum stated charge requirement was used on all 4 days, and the RUC and feasibilities were fairly large. You know, they exceeded 500 megawatts on all 4 days. However, the minimum stated charge, basically what it does is it sets a minimum threshold of stated charge that the storage resources have to have. And effectively on the days of the 5th, the 7th, and the 8th, during most of the days, the storage resources had at least as much stated charge as was needed in the real-time market to meet their day-ahead schedules. However, the 6th was a little bit different. On the 6th, the storage resources had sufficient stated charge going into the day through the early hours of the day, but then in this, you know, this kind of area of the graph that's circled by the red oval, you know, later in the afternoon, there were some very high prices on the market. The real-time economic dispatches from the market, so the market signals, were responding to those very high prices and sending dispatch instructions to the storage fleet to discharge. And that's represented by the blue line here. And then the black line represents the day-ahead schedules. You can see that the day-ahead schedules did start to get incrementally larger as you got through the afternoon hours. But what you see is the blue line really takes a sharp dip below the black line, and those are the hours when or the periods when the minimum stated charge requirement is kicking in. It's saying, gee, I know that if I continue to discharge these resources, even though prices are high, I'm not going to have stated charge for later. If I don't have that stated charge for later, I'm going to put myself into a situation where reliability is jeopardized. So I'm going to hold back the stated charge from specific individual resources. And once I get to a point where I feel confident that those resources are going to have enough stated charge to get us through the evening, then I can start to dispatch them. And you see exactly that in the data. You see the discharges in real time go back up to the levels, and in some cases even above the levels where they were scheduled in the day-ahead market, which is what you want from your output here. And you know, we didn't drop load on September 6th, and the storage resources were charged, and they were helping with these conditions. So you know, I think we would say that this is a win, and and effectively the tool did what we wanted. Sorry, I've got something going on here. Okay, so let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Great. Okay, so energy storage enhancements included 6 major items, including improvements to the exceptional dispatch tools. So we had the ability, you know, to just outline what the tools related to exceptional dispatch were. We had the ability for operators to exceptionally require storage resources to hold stated charge. We had additional opportunity cost compensation for storage resources while holding stated charge due to the exceptional dispatch. So you've got these resources, you're telling them they can't discharge below a certain level of stated charge. They could potentially be missing out on opportunities in the real-time market. And because they're missing out on opportunities, they are, you know, the idea here is that they need to be compensated for that lost opportunity. The third item is more internal work, and it is updating the manual tools and sort of the Excel spreadsheets that our storage, or well, the operations team is using to manage and monitor the storage fleet and kind of have visibility into state of charge and actually issue these kinds of exceptional dispatches. So a new suite of tools for the storage operators. And kind of the feedback, again, this has been an ongoing dialogue between policy and the operations team, but the dialogue has really been around, do you, the operations team, feel comfortable with the retirement of the minimum stated charge requirement, seeing that it was used and frankly used fairly heavily during the heat wave in September? And I think the answer is yes, as long as we can get the changes that we were talking about and that have been proposed and accepted and we're currently developing from the energy storage enhancements policy related to exceptional dispatch in place, then we feel comfortable retiring the minimum stated charge requirement. Now, the unfortunate part is that we've been working very closely with our software development team, and currently the development of all three aspects are supposed to be complete in fall of 2023. And obviously that would mean that we wouldn't have the full suite of tools available to our operations team until after summer 2023, when again they may need to rely on this minimum stated charge requirement. So effectively, we will not have all of the aspects of energy storage enhancements in prior to the summer that's coming up. So the punchline here is on the next slide, and then I promise I will stop and take questions. What we're asking for in this policy. So this policy proposes an extension of the minimum stated charge requirements until the changes related to energy storage enhancements specific to the exceptional dispatch. So this is not the entire energy storage enhancements policy. It's just the exceptional dispatch aspects of energy storage enhancements. As soon as these tools are done, we are going to retire the minimum stated charge requirement. We're not expanding the scope of this policy to expand the ISO's authority to use the minimum stated charge. We're not adjusting any of the other tools that the ISO has. We're being very targeted, and we're just saying we want to extend the usage of this specific tool. And then we're also putting in an additional caveat. Obviously, sometimes there are delays with software coming out in the event that the software can't be delivered in fall of 2023 and that date is pushed back to a later date. We're going to say specifically that we're going to not extend the use of this tool beyond September 30th, 2024. So it is likely going to be a 1-year extension of the minimum stated charge requirement, but it could be a 2-year extension. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to extend it beyond that. So even if the tools are not complete, we're not planning, at this time to ask for an additional extension. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking, and I apologize for that, but I do want to stop and pause for questions here if anybody has them.
Yes, Jay. So the first one we have is Kathleen Kober from Vistra. So let's go ahead and unmute her. Michelle?
Morning, Kathleen.
Morning. Can you confirm you can hear me, Gabe?
I can, yes.
Excellent. Vistra has a prepared statement that we would like to provide for your consideration. So, I appreciate your patience. This initiative moves in the opposite direction of progress. It is counter to what CAISO committed to at the December board meeting to work with storage operators on practical issues affecting storage. During the multiple times the minimum stated charge constraint has been used, it has been clear MSOC does not achieve the goal that you are intending. MSOC cannot drive the actual stated charge early enough to do so in a rational way, given the real-time market optimization window. The hold exceptional dispatch is the only effective way to do this, as proved during September. I'm speaking as a storage operator from a place of experience, not hypothesis. We received hold exceptional dispatches during the heat wave, and that was what was effective. In fact, before CAISO operations started doing this, we called the floor to let them know that the market window could not ensure that they had the stated charge they were requiring in the hours with minimum stated charge limits, and that they needed to issue hold exceptional dispatches to do so. Once operations started using the hold exceptional dispatches, that is when they were able to get the stated charge reserved in advance of the net peak hours, which was the original intent of this tool. We have shown collectively, storage operators and the CAISO operations, that this tool does not work as intended. We believe CAISO started using the hold exceptional dispatches because CAISO realized the minimum stated charge alone did not hold that stated charge for the periods that was needed. There is no need at all for a minimum stated charge in the future. Exceptional dispatch at least allows storage operators to recoup our lost opportunity while providing the value and the goal of this tool. We hope to work with the CAISO on long-term solutions. I do want to be really clear that Vistra will oppose this effort continuing at the highest levels of CAISO. We respectfully request that you close this initiative immediately as it is not needed. And we also respectfully request that you please focus your resources on the commitment you made in December to launch an initiative to address storage challenges. And Gabe, thank you very much for letting us share our statement.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot there, Kathleen, and quite a bit to unpack. So we'll certainly take this, I think first and foremost, we're going to take this feedback very seriously. We will be having additional conversations with regard to this feedback with our operations team. We will be thinking about this critically. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Brenda, did you say that there was somebody else on the line?
Yeah, we have Adita from SCE. I mispronounced. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Brenda. Good morning, Gabe. I'm going to ask a very basic question. I apologize for that. It's an operations question. I was just hoping, could you just, because unfortunately I wasn't involved in the summer liability initiative, so I'm trying to basically just understand operationally how MSOC, very brief points, how it operates, and if you could, also say, well, operationally how you anticipate the energy storage enhancements ED proposal to operate, but at least in the MSOC side, just so I understand. Sorry.
Yeah, so if we could go back, I think it's slide 7 maybe. Yeah, so the point of the minimum stated charge requirement is that it basically identifies, I think the first thing it does is it checks to see if there was a RUC and feasibility in the day-ahead market. So our day-ahead market goes through, and then we have a RUC process, and there's a potential that there is an inability for supply to fully meet demand in RUC. As we've mentioned, this happens on a handful of days per year, maybe 2 handfuls of days per year, roughly, and then in bad years, maybe a little bit more than that. And when there's a RUC and feasibility, and our operators say, yeah, we think that this is going to be a concerning day, this tool is triggered. And what the tool does is it looks at the discharge awards during the hours that we've tagged as being a critical set of hours. Oh, my gosh. So you've got the set of hours. So let's just say the set of hours is hour ending 18 through 22. And we look at the discharge awards for storage resources, and effectively what the tool does, and it's a little bit more nuanced than this, but effectively what it does is it adds up the discharge awards during that period. It says, okay, how much stated charge do you need as a resource to be able to meet those discharge awards? And it uses those values to set a requirement that's actually enforced as a constraint in the real-time market. And again, this constraint only enters the real-time market in those hours immediately preceding the critical hours. So that's basically what it does.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions in the queue?
Yes, we do have Callie Wells on the line. Callie, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, Gabe. It's Callie Wells with WPTF. Quick question for you. So in this presentation, you guys state that you're basically kind of having to go through this effort because energy storage enhancements hasn't been implemented yet, and it sounds like you're on target for fall of 2023. I was curious why I guess that implementation is being pushed to fall 2023. The policy was board approved in December, and I haven't seen any, unless I'm missing it somewhere, draft tariff language or anything like that. So I was curious if you can shed some light on even the FERC filing process for energy storage enhancements and why that wasn't more of a priority, knowing that this was going to expire this summer.
Yeah, I have Bill on the phone, and he can speak to the filing and where we are in that process. But the ISO has a lot of balls in the air right now. There's a lot going on in terms of software development, and basically, as an organization, I know we've been pushing incredibly hard to get this policy in as well as other policies, and I think, looking at all the work that we had to do, this was the absolute best schedule that our internal project management office could come up with in order to get this done. I would encourage you to direct other questions to like the release users group, the RUG. I think they can shed a little bit more light on the specific prioritization and kind of what took precedence over this. And I think there might even be some ability for public input in that process, but that's definitely getting out of my realm of expertise. But I can promise you that me personally, I've been advocating for the storage solutions and getting them in place quickly, and it's really been a struggle just because of so much that the ISO is subscribed to right now. Bill, did you want to add on just about the tariff filing?
Yeah, well, I mean, as Callie knows, obviously the tariff language keys off when we'll implement and not the other way around. That'd be a fun world for legal. But I sent the draft tariff language to Brenda this morning, so it should be posted within the week, so we stakeholders can at least start to review.
Okay, I appreciate that. And it sounds like, and I don't know if you guys have considered this, but it sounds like the MSOC, you're keeping it around because there's some elements of energy storage enhancements that will help address that. And I think Kathleen pointed to one is the ED one element of that. Is there the potential, have you guys considered maybe separating the filing so that it's not such a huge implementation list and those pieces can go in place before the summer and then MSOC can be removed as originally scheduled?
I don't know if Gabe wants to answer, but I can. Yeah, it's no problem to separate the filings. I mean, we haven't gotten that far in discussing what it would do. In my mind, these would be, separate filings, but again, it all depends on the implementation, what's going when.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks. And I'll follow the tariff process, and it sounds like the release user group as well might be helpful.
And I would just say that, I think the ISO as an organization is trying to focus more on, getting timely development done. Obviously, we've signed up for some pretty big projects in the next few years. But frankly, internally, there has been more onus put on this, and I think this is going to be one of the things that we're trying to work on and get better at over the next few years.
All right, the next caller in queue, Perry, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead. Perry, I think that you're hitting the unmute button at the same time as me. Go ahead, your line is unmuted.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can, yeah, Perry. Hey,
right.
How you doing?
Good. Thanks, Gabe. I wanted to just touch on, you mentioned this condition this summer. I believe it was probably around the September 6th time frame, where the MSOC was applied, and these were days with extremely high prices, greater than $1,000 price that you were talking about earlier. Maybe it's on this slide. I went back to look. I didn't see any energy storage bids that were greater than $1,000 on any of those days in the earlier hours of the day that you're saying was you're highlighting as the one of the main reasons you want to keep this around. Can you speak to why that might be? Are storage resources prevented in any way from bidding greater than $1,000 in the real-time market when prices would justify it?
No, I think there was an initiative because I know that traditional gas resources can bid above $1,000. So I think there was an initiative to address this for storage resources as well, and I think this probably happened around the same time. So I think they do have the ability to bid above 1,000 in the real-time market. Now, I'm not surprised that storage resources are getting instructions to discharge when prices are above 1,000. I think that makes a lot of sense. If you're getting a day-ahead award, and even if you're making like $800 in the day-ahead market, if you see prices that are $1,200 or $1,500, I on a 5-minute basis, where even if prices spiked up to $1,500 during one particular interval, and in the next interval they went down to $300 or $200 or $100, I would certainly expect to see storage resources discharging at those times. So I think the market results that we saw are very much in line with what I would have expected on these very tight, very high price days with prolonged sustained.
You're right. It makes sense that they should be bidding 1,000, but I think it actually goes further, and maybe it's just a problem with the reporting of the bids. But maybe they were. It seems to me that any energy storage resource that's economically rational would have been bidding actually more than $1,000, but I'm not seeing that in the data. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm asking: are they being prevented from doing so in some way? Yeah. Because fundamentally, I mean, that's the key issue in front of you is if the storage resources were allowed to appropriately represent those later day opportunity costs, you would have seen them bidding $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, and you wouldn't have seen these discharges in hours 14 and 15. They would have been saving it for you. I think that's pretty clear. When prices are less than 1,000, you don't see this issue of early discharge, right? On these days, prices went above 1,000, and they're prevented from representing that in their bids. So at least I think they are. That's why I'm asking. It's very suspect to me to not see any bids on these guys greater than 1,000. So that's why I was asking that question. If that is the case, then that's the fundamental market issue, and it's really a price formation issue. Right. And like I said, they would have held charge for you, as you see every other day when prices are less than 1,000. But so maybe we could follow up on that point, but I'll just put that out there that seems to be the big red flag to me. That being said, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say I wanted to move on from that point, but if you got something.
Okay. No, just to kind of wrap up, I think this is an excellent plug for the Price Formation Enhancements Initiative. We know that things aren't working perfectly for storage resources right now. It's sort of in that initiative that we kind of want to get into some of these details, and I think this is absolutely going to be kind of one of the cornerstone topics for some aspects of that policy. Now, the price formation,
No, I hear you. The issue there, though, is that based on the timeline, that initiative is going to drag out a long time. This is a fairly simple update to first dig in to see if something is preventing these resources from bidding more than $1,000 and correcting that. I mean, it's clear that they have costs that are greater than $1,000 when real-time prices are going to $1,900, $2,000 in a day. Okay. That being said, I am also, just with this proposal, I'm concerned by the lack of analysis over the 2 years that the constraint was being used. You'll recall back in, I guess it was 2021, that the stakeholders were extremely opposed to this policy while it was being developed until in the final hour when CAISO reined in its potential use based on the RUC and feasibilities, and then promised to sunset it in 2 years from then. That's what really got it over the finish line back then. And from what I've seen, stakeholders in the data that I can look at, and this is why I really wanted to see this content in your proposal, but from the data that I'm looking at, stakeholders can't really conclusively determine, first, if the constraint prevented any real reliability issue. I think it's pretty inconclusive of that. Second, what the impact it had on the market clearing prices and efficient dispatch. I haven't seen any analysis on that. And third, if the existing tools that the operators already have access to are insufficient to solve this underlying reliability issue. And that's key. What I'd expect to see those as sort of metrics that CAISO would come back with and say, here's why we still need this, why we still think we need this tool. It was also a different time back then, right? We didn't have the experience of seeing that the batteries are doing exactly what we want them to do every other day of the year. And we've got that experience now. That's why I kind of expected to see more. I just wanted to point out another reason I would have wanted to see this type of analysis in this proposal is that I do see a variety of confounding factors that if you guys would consider them, I think it would be shown that the constraint's actually not really necessary. And I picked out I have like 3 or 4. First is that the operators were still EDing. I think Kathleen mentioned this. The operators were still EDing storage on these days. And it actually looks like they were issuing EDs to undo the effects of the MSOC. So there's this little bit of dichotomy there that I'd like, to see unpacked. Second, there was the software issue that essentially nullified half of the in-the-money charging bid stack on these days. And I think, it doesn't take anyone too smart to realize that if you just take half of your charging bid stack away, then, and prices are high enough that they would be in the money, then you'd end up with more state of charge in the hours that you need them. The third confounding factor is that the resources are actually being held back in the most stressed hour of the most stressed day that CAISO has ever experienced. The MSOC bound, and we were holding these resources back, and that was the hour you needed them the most. That's a little bit of a con to, if you will, to the MSOC. And not to mention those resources actually ended the day with plenty of state of charge left. So, it seems, just looking back on it, it seems that it was to no effect to try to hold them back in that hour. And that actually could have caused a reliability issue. The fourth point is just and this is maybe a smaller issue, but it would be great to see some information about. It's just in the threshold question of, will we apply MSOC tomorrow? It's based on RUC infeasibilities, right? And we know that the RUC doesn't consider excess energy storage above the IFM schedules as being available to meet RUC needs. So that, to me, sort of calls into question whether CAISO is even using the constraint on the right days. And I'd expect to see some kind of look into that. Maybe it's a small, I just don't know because I haven't seen, but maybe it's a small number of megawatts, but it might be enough to say that, maybe we would not have been RUC infeasible on those days if we were considering all that above IFM energy that was available. So, I would have expected to see the proposal discuss these types of impacts and truly evaluate the efficacy of the constraint, being that you're asking for an extension of something that was really highly charged back 2 years ago. Timeline wise, if you'll just let me, last point on timeline, I think that Callie sort of alluded to this as well. I just wanted to remind you that last go around, you all finalized this constraint design in March of 2021, and you were still able to implement it for the summer. It was fair, and it was very it was a very complicated implementation too. You're adding new constraints into the market and such. Nonetheless, you were able to get it built in time for summer of 2021, from March to June, or I think it might have went a little late in July. And here we are 2 years later. So we've had the 2 years. The proposals that you're saying that need to be implemented in order to retire this are far simpler than the MSOC was. And they've already been approved by the board 4 months earlier than they were in 2021. So that's why you can see why anyone would look at this and find it really hard to believe that you can't muster up some level of effort to implement the approved solutions prior to the sunset of this tariff provision. That's, so I had a variety of things. Most of it was related to just can you help us prove out the reliability need, the market efficacy for this thing, and then help me with why can't we get the far simpler proposals implemented in time?
Yeah, I think those are excellent comments, Perry, and I am taking notes here, so I appreciate you bringing all this information up. I would just state that the whole reason we're here is because the operations team is telling us that they need this tool, and I think that was one of the questions that you had asked. I know we have Guillermo on the phone, and I know he's done a lot of analysis, and there's been a lot of things that have been put out publicly, specifically about the heat wave, but information in general about the tool. So maybe he's got some comments on just kind of where we are in terms of data analysis on the efficacy of the tool. And frankly, yeah, I definitely hear you about the software development. As you know, and I think many others on this call know, sometimes there's a little bit of disconnect between what policy thinks really should be implemented and what the ISO software development team is able to implement, and the prioritization is very tricky. So, and like I said, I think that is one of the things that the ISO is going to be putting a little bit of a spotlight on over the next few years. But Guillermo, are you on the phone, and are you able to maybe talk a little bit about some of the data that you've looked at?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, there was a lot on that set of comments, so let me try to unpack as much as I can one by one. First, regarding the information seen by the participants that they are not able to see bids above $1,000 for storage resources, and there was the term referred that there was something preventing them to bid that way. No, there was nothing preventing them from bidding that way. It is the market design that we have in place. We have a project that we implemented maybe a couple of years ago, and that was per FERC rule. It was a FERC order. And in that logic, we have very specific guidelines of under what conditions, what type of resources can bid in anytime above $1,000. The bid cap can be raised from $1,000 to $2,000 under two conditions. One, when a specific resource submits a cost-verified energy bid that is above $1,000. We verify that bid and we approve it, and then the bid cap can raise to $2,000. Or, given the dynamics in the wider area, the maximum import bid price that we estimate exceeds the $1,000. When either of these two conditions are met, then the bid cap is going to be raised to $2,000. Now, when that cap is in place of $2,000, different resources can bid up to $2,000. It's not opening the gates for every single resource to bid now up to $2,000. It's only for the hours where this condition is met, and it's only for some specific resources. In particular, the non-RA back import bids can indeed bid up to $2,000. In some cases, the reliability demand response resources can bid up to $2,000. But again, it's very tailored. And through the discussion of the implementation effort that we had for this FERC order, I forgot the number. Opportunity cost was not in the mix of justification for bidding above $1,000. So it was not a glitch. It was not an unintended outcome. It is per the rules that we implemented with that FERC order. Second point, regarding the lack of analysis in this regard, well, I have to review that point of view because we do have extensive analysis of how things play in the summer time frame. First, we have provided for every month of the summer analysis specific to different areas of interest, including the application of the MSOC. We did that for 2021. We did that again for 2022. In 2022, obviously, we put more focus on what happened because it was the most critical time, and we have highlighted the performance of the storage resources, specifically the performance of the MOC. For the September analysis that we reported publicly through the report, through the stakeholder calls, through one dedicated session with the MSC about the storage performance, we were very targeted and surgical to expand on how the storage resources were dispatched and the suboptimality that we saw in the way how they were positioned for the September 6th. So there is information that we can send the links, but there are at least 3 reference points. One, the specific summary that is 174 pages long, including the MOC description and performance. The stakeholder call that we dedicated for that assessment. And third, the specific and dedicated call that we have with the Market Surveillance Committee to analyze and discuss the performance of the storage resources. And indeed, one of the critical pieces of that 2-hour discussion was in regards to the performance of the MOC and how that helped to contain the further depletion of the state of charge for the fleet of storage resources. I would encourage the participant to check that information that is publicly available. The third one, the reliability condition that we justify or show the need for this constraint because of the reliability. Well, what best date to show how this worked out than September 6th? We were in emergency stage 2. We were in an imminent condition to shed load. As you may all recall how critical that day, that was the day when we broke the load record of 52,000 megawatts. And this is the day when we highlighted how the overall performance of storage resources help or put us in a jeopardy to be able to meet the peak conditions. Right there, you have a very actual case of how this was important for reliability. Every megawatt counted, and having depleted storage resources prior to the peak could have even further exacerbated the condition for the reliability that we have for that peak time. And if you look at the analysis that we have provided, we are showing explicitly how the MOC helped to either slow down the depletion of storage resources or to contain the discharge of those resources to maintain the SOC. And that information, again, is publicly available. And let me pause that to see if we have any follow-up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for offering that opportunity to just follow up. I just wanted to confirm that I have a couple notes on each of these, but on the last thing that you said related to the bidding, did you say that an energy storage resource cannot use an opportunity cost in their bid for a cost verification or for a cost verified bid above 1,000? Or did you say
that's correct?
Okay, they can't.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, okay, so I think that means that then they can't really bid above $1,000. I think in effect that's what that means. But maybe, let me noodle on that a little bit more. Because you said, the rules are kind of different depending on the type of resource because it's based on these types of fuel costs, et cetera. I'll noodle on that a little bit, but thanks for that clarification. And then, I will say, thanks for pointing to all of the analysis. I wasn't saying that some analysis wasn't done. I mean, yes, we had the summer reports where there were a couple pages sort of devoted to this type of to this constraint and how it performed. We had the meetings on it. I'll just point out, these existing analyses, they tend to say, here's what happened, and what I'm looking for, from a policy perspective now, not an analysis perspective, is I need something to connect the dots back to the things that the stakeholders care about. And I think that's the piece that was maybe missing from that analysis is first, an analysis that says, yes, this did in fact prevent reliability issues. I said it earlier, I don't want to repeat everything again, but then also something that explains these confounding factors and what impact they might have actually had on that day. Because, you know, if you fix the software issue, maybe there is no problem. Maybe the MSOC would not have ever been binding. There's these kinds of things that I'd like to see unpacked, and I think it would make sense for those to be combined and put into the actual policy proposal that is requesting the extension. So something to just bring all that analysis together and connect the dots for the stakeholders to really prove the need here, given how contentious it was when we first approved this. On your point about that September 6th, the most stressed day in CAISO's history, most stressed hour. I'll go back and look at the analysis, but my first read of it was that that the constraint was minimally binding on resources in hours prior to the hour of most need, and I thought it was that the hour of most need was when the MSOC was most binding and most holding back the resources, which is what I would take issue with. But I can go back and confirm that reading of that as well. And then I'll just it just kind of popped into my head also related to the pricing. No, you know, I'll wait on that. Let me go back and look at the cost verifying for energy storage resources. But yeah, thanks for that so far. Those are my, you know, replies, I guess. But all in all, it's like I really just want to see in this proposal the clear set of here's exactly what happened, here's how much it was binding, here's how much it was useful or not useful, here were the confounding factors, and some narrative that ties that all together to really say, yeah, this is why we need this for, you know, up to another year or two, you guys said.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And let me emphasize in one point here, because it's a matter of visibility. Yes, the most visible component of the analysis was the summary report and the corresponding stakeholder call. After that, we actually did further analysis specific to the storage performance, and I recall now even better. So we discussed this in a dedicated session with the MSC. Brenda can put the details of when that was in the chat. And we also introduced that type of analysis in the upcoming market performance forum that follow. It may have been the December one. So that is additional analysis that was very targeted for the storage performance. So I would encourage people to look at those beyond the summer report.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I looked at all that and I was there, but, you know, I'll go back and look again. I would just expect in the policy proposal to extend this really contentious thing that we'd see a version of that ties it back to the stuff that the stakeholders care about for accepting this extension. Thanks.
Harry, do you mind if I just pick up? I'm really not trying to, you know, take us down a rabbit hole here, but I think we can certainly help to put the pieces together to show that there were reliability needs for this tool in September. I think some of the analysis that you might be asking for in terms of like, well, what kind of impacts does this have on prices, and, you know, potentially are there other tools that could better help to address this? I don't see those as much impacting the scope of this policy per se. I think the need here is, or the ask here is, you know, do we need to extend this tool for reliability or not? And I think what you're saying is, well, you know, show me that you need to do it. And I think Guillermo's saying, to some extent, I think we already have, and I think there's some documentation out there that shows that. And like I said, I think we can you know, try to fold even more of that into the description of this paper as we move towards the final proposal. And I'm sort of on the side, I think, of a lot of the comments that we've heard already. You know, I don't think that this is the final policy that we want in place. The reason that we wanted this to be a temporary stopgap measure in the first place is because the ISO acknowledged that this wasn't the final stopping point for policy on storage. So I also want to get into those other questions and potential solutions, and I think there is policy on deck to do that. But I think what we're saying here clearly is we're not going to get to that in the next year. We're not going to answer all the questions, but we certainly need to open those questions up in other forums.
Sure. I mean, the way that you're talking about this proposal right now is we have a proposal approved that if it was implemented, we wouldn't need this extension. It's kind of that's how you've laid it out. And that proposal basically implements an ED hold for storage, which is something you don't really need any tariff to do. Where you need the tariff is for the settlement. So you could be working on a tool and implementing that tool before summer and not need the tariff. I mean, you're already issuing essentially ED holds that aren't settling in that way. So I'd say, don't hold up implementation and try to extend. I'd say put that same level of effort we put in 2021 to get the ED hold tool in place. And you can always follow up with the settlement aspect in the fall. And then if you want, you can also say, you know what, in the fall, we're going to implement that settlement. And guess what? We'll resettle the summer with it too for these energy storage. You have options there is my point. Just on the timeline there.
Yeah, I totally understand that perspective, and believe me, we're gonna take that back, and we're gonna have these hard conversations, and hopefully maybe even next time we'll have a representative from the project management office on the phone. But I guess what I'm getting at is you're also saying, gee, I really need a lot more data analysis, and I think from your last comment and from what I'm saying, I don't know that we really need to do the additional analysis for this specific policy.
We have Guillermo on. I mean, at least one thing that I saw as one of those big confounding factors was the software issue. Guillermo, can you remind me, have you published the impact that the software issue would have had on September 6th? How many megawatts of charge bids were not considered due to the software issue? I think that's probably one of the biggest compounding factors, but there were other stuff that sort of indicated that the MSOC actually was, while it was meant to help reliability, could have also been hurting reliability, as evidenced from operators still EDing resources away from what the MSOC was telling them to do, EDing earlier, et cetera. So that's where you can see all of those types of confounding factors are floating around in my head that I haven't seen enough information about. If it's out there, please point me to it.
Yeah, well, let's try to unpack this because there are several ideas here that can be conflating the point that we want to discuss. I understand that there may be this concept of a butterfly effect. Now, let's try to unpack and dissect the different drivers here. Yes, we were transparent about the issue that we have earlier in the day where the software was not allowing some resources to charge if their bid was above certain price. Now, there is a dynamic here because in order to properly assess that, we would have to create a counterfactual world of what would have happened otherwise, not just for that point on time, but throughout the rest of the day, right? You are changing the whole trajectory based on what you change something in the morning. So it's realistically not feasible to project what would have been an alternate path if something has changed differently in the early hours of the day. And if the prices are different, that could be on its own be cured because now it's price driven. If the clearing price is now within the range of the bid, that issue is going to be moot. So there are different assumptions that we would have to take on top of assumptions to try to come with this counterfactual assessment. So even if you can come with that, it's not going to be quite meaningful. Now, putting that in one side, we have to recognize that the dynamic that we're trying to assess here for the critical hours somehow may be having impacted, yeah, because you have less state of charge for later in the day, that's granted, But that doesn't on its own dismiss the dynamic that happens in the afternoon, in which, given that the prices are right, all resources are going to be discharging just because they are in merit. Whether they were already at 80% of charge or 90% of charge is not going to change the dynamic that because they are in merit, they can be discharged. And if there is nothing preventing them to discharge further, that will continue to happen. So even though it may move the reference point of how far it could have been discharged if they have more or less state of charge, it wouldn't negate the dynamic that is observed in the afternoon for which the constraint is needed.
That's a good point, Guillermo. I think the reason that I asked about it, though, is if you raise the total aggregate energy stored prior to getting to the event, the whole fleet can only move so much in 1 hour as it is. And from the data that I've seen, I think in one of your detailed reports, it looked to me like the most that the fleet, that the RA fleet actually, because that's what the MSOC applies to, would have been able to move down in that hour, would have maybe barely violated the minimum SOC. And I say barely, it looks like maybe 10 megawatts. So if I could have any type of magnitude on saying, hey, Perry, earlier in the day, there were 1,500 megawatts of charging bids that were above $150 that the market didn't consider. That's giving me a lot of information about where that starting point SOC likely would have been. And if it was 10 megawatts more, I'd be willing to say that you probably didn't need the MSOC on that day and it wouldn't have been binding. And that completely changes the argument of the need for this thing. And it's the perfect case example because it's the most stressed day that CAISO's ever had.
Yeah, well, we can continue to think about this particular day and maybe try to provide some more details about this. But I think your point's taken, Perry.
Thanks, Gabe. And I just wanted to thank you guys all for bearing with me through that. But it's just these are the thoughts that pop into my head when I read this stuff. So,
well, I think we're all in agreement. This isn't the place where we are right now with managing storage resources isn't where we want to be in the long term. It's probably not even where we want to be in the medium term. We need to start getting market solutions to help manage the storage fleet, not operator actions to manage the storage fleet. And I think a lot of the conversation we've had today kind of is stressing that. And frankly, the ISO agrees with you. I know that there's policy in the pipeline to do this, but it's just sounding like, gee, with the capacity we've already got and where we're heading, we need to get on this faster. Okay, Brenda, do we have anybody else in the queue right now?
I think we
do have Kathleen, yes.
This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I just had a couple clarifications I wanted to provide. I've had my hand raised for a while, so some of this might be touching back to like Callie. But as I listened to Perry, I'll also clarify a couple things he said, or our perspective. I'll clarify our perspective on a couple things said. First, the fact that this was a contentious tool. I'll be more blunt and honest and transparent for the broader stakeholder community that the minimum stated charge tool was a negotiated agreement and outcome at the highest levels of heads of organizations with the CEO or COO or VP C-suite level of CAISO. So I won't ascribe it to anyone specific, but at the leadership level, this was a negotiated agreement that was able to be reached on an interim basis in recognition that the CAISO had little experience operating a large penetration of storage, and that interim nature of the proposal, I think, was a huge part of why some folks were able to get behind that negotiated agreement. To be clear, Vistra did not agree to that, and we were not a part of that agreement because we were very concerned that it would interfere with our ability to manage the storage appropriately during periods of stress conditions, which we think we've proven out with data. The next clarification I want to make, it just to be super clear, and Guillermo did answer it, but it was a little confusing that, and I think Perry still sounded confused. Storage operators are not able to bid above 1,000. The way that CAISO implemented for Order 831 restricted those reference level adjustments for purposes for changes on fuel price. That's why. And it's not necessarily tied to 831 policy. You could have debated what FERC's intent was a few different ways, but this is a CAISO policy decision that cost verified offers above 1,000 are for fuel costs only, and storage don't have fuel costs in and of themselves. Number two, I want to clarify also the September heat wave in this discussion on data. Yes, we have reviewed, like Perry, we've reviewed the CAISO's analysis, but I want to, but to be perfectly honest, like we own 400 megawatts of 4-hour batteries that we operate and that we operated during the heat wave. So we have our own data and our own experience with actually operating these units and the challenges that we faced in doing so. We've identified those challenges. In the energy storage enhancements, Gabe, you know, we submitted comments right after and said, dude, we've learned, and I'll be super informal, dude, we've learned so much. Can we please talk about it? And can we please get down to what were the challenges that made it difficult during that period so that we can have an initiative where we actually tackle practical issues instead of hypothetical concerns. Submitted that in comments. We submitted a board letter. We did get a commitment from the CAISO at the board that you recognized that we needed to do that initiative, and we were going to do that initiative, and we were going to look at this analysis, and we were going to identify what needed to be explored to fix those challenges. One of the things, and so this initiative seems to me like you had that backroom conversation and decided this was what you needed. This is not the conclusion that we came to looking at data. One of the big challenges, honestly, is that the default energy bid for storage is not a good representation of the opportunity cost of storage's use in the earlier real-time market runs. Mitigation, over-mitigating of storage at levels that does not use them rationally is not an efficient, optimal market outcome that leads to reliability. This was a huge issue. We've raised this with you in energy storage. Others have raised this with you. We're not alone. You've heard this message. The DEBs are a big problem. The other message you've heard is the interplay of ancillary services and energy is a big problem. This is not the problem. And if you go back to slide 12, I want to make crystal clear why this is not the problem. And it's distracting from talking about the actual challenges. The sub-bullet you have here, ability for operators to exceptionally require storage resources to hold state of charge, that is already available to operators. This bullet is misleading for folks who are not operating storage who may not know that. They may not know that CAISO operations has the ability for its operators to exceptionally require storage resources to hold their state of charge. That is an effect that does not require a conversation with a project manager, does not require release planning. Doesn't require it at all. I'm literally telling you, Gabe, this happened. This happened in September. I'm confident they have the ability. This is what we know was effective. We know that they didn't have it originally because we called. We know that they then started doing it, so we know it's available. It is misleading to imply it's not. Perry, I think, hit the nail on the head. What is not yet implemented is the full settlement solution. I know that we talked about it, and I think in the policy phase when you were discussing this, and it wasn't being used yet, so I recognize that. After your policy phase started discussing it, it was started to be used in September, so this is new information. I want to be crystal clear with everyone. This is available. This is what operators started using to actually be able to manage through this period. So Guillermo, I don't know that you're looking at the data right or that you're getting the same conclusions that we're getting. So and when I say right, I'm sorry. I'm just very concerned that the commitment made by CAISO was for us all to look at this data together. That is how I understood the commitment. I understood the commitment was we would look at the data, we would look at how storage was operating, we would look at this heat wave, and we would look at data to identify what needed to be changed. And we've done that. This is not it.
Well, like I said, I really appreciate you being here today, Kathleen. I appreciate your comments. I will I'm taking this to heart. I will certainly escalate this internally, and we'll have those conversations. But thank you for your comments. I do appreciate them.
All right, we do have another question in queue.
Perfect.
Sergio, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. This is Sergio Dueñas with the California Energy Storage Alliance, CISA. So I think that a lot of what has been said is shared by CISA in terms of the potential concerns about this being extended not only through this summer, but as your slides indicate a bit later, even these materials appear to open the door for an even further extension that would effectively double the time that this function would be part of the market as to what was agreed upon, I would say, before with stakeholders. So that is definitely concerning. I do share the calls for the documentation of this initiative to include information, even if it has been made publicly available in other documents. It should be included here, because anyone that is trying to understand the rationale of the CAISO for extending any mechanism or tool in the market for a period of time is owed the proof. You have the burden of the proof that this is necessary, that this continues to be necessary. So even if it's in another document, it should be included in the record of this initiative, in my opinion. But I think more broadly, I think this signals a bit of a concern that I have with, process with the stakeholders that are gathered here. I think this community has been quite responsive to what the ISO has needed to do, for example, in the Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative. We, all the CAISO staff and stakeholders, we've changed our focus several times. We focused on new proposals, and we got the policy approved in a timely manner. And it is very, disheartening in a way that despite the fact that we got to the finish line in December, as Perry noted, ahead of other policies that might be being considered by the ISO now, this seems to just not be priority, because the fact is that the lack of time or the difficulty in getting it done is constrained by the resources that you have, of course, but also about how priority you see what is necessary for this to be, for the MSOC requirement to be retired, and ultimately to fulfill that commitment with stakeholders that have, in good faith, continued developing policy here. So I think, as you can tell, I'm echoing some of the requests, particularly for information completeness in this initiative, and we would like to, encourage the ISO to reprioritize the workflow in a way that allows them to meet their commitments with stakeholders that have continued working in very detailed ways through policy that we are all learning together. I agree with what Kathleen said before, and Perry as well. Before 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was a completely different world of information. from participants and from the ISO. Today, we have much better tools to understand what is priority and how we can move forward. So I think that pretty much summarizes my point at this point. But thank you for your work, Gabe, and for listening to us. We just hope that this doesn't fall on deaf ears further along the way. Thank you.
No, I appreciate those comments too, Sergio. Thanks for letting us know about that. Okay, Brenda, any other questions in the queue?
There are no more questions.
Okay, I will turn it back over to you then to wrap up for the meeting.
Thank you, Gabe. So I will go ahead into the next steps for this initiative. We have posted related materials on the stakeholder webpage. I also linked it on the chat below. Feel free to submit any comments and questions, written comments to the commenting tool for this straw proposal by February 23rd by midnight, if you can. The commenting tool is available right now, and I provided like a monthly viewpoint of where we're at. So in 2 weeks, those comments are due. But we will go ahead and review your comments, and we appreciate everyone's discussion in this call. And we will be closing our call at this time. I will pass it back to Michelle, my event producer. Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.